long break is over, and we are back with your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. That could only be the money stop with the Cusumano brothers. He's Cole, I'm Steven, and Cole coming off of the pretty lengthy Olympic break here, a much-needed layoff for all the drivers, teams, owners, you name it. And here we are. We're back ready for Richmond, coming off of the last race was Indy. I can't believe how long ago that feels like it was. Kyle Larson, my pick to win, was the winner. We predicted half of the top 10, including each of the top 3. Really good value picks by us with Todd Gilliland and Noah Gragson. But as we splash and go, Cole, get right into it. I think that feels like a really long time ago. We're just happy that NASCAR is back, and we're in the home stretch. There's 4 races left before the playoffs.
Yeah, man, crazy times. I thought the race at Indy on the oval was incredible. Saw some great racing there. We saw Kyle Larson get to flex his muscles, bring HMS back to victory lane at this famed Brickyard, score his series best now, 4th win of the season. And yeah, I just am so pumped to get back to some racing this weekend. 4 races to the playoffs is a huge deal. There's some really notable guys on the bubble like Ty Gibbs, Ross Chastain, Bubba Wallace that are going to be in need of some really good runs here to close out the season. Got some really tricky races coming up here. I think Richmond should be included in that, which is weird to say given this track record of this track. But we'll get into more of why it could be a little bit of a crapshoot as we go into the analysis portion. But yeah, at a much-needed 2-week break on our part for sure, as much as the drivers and teams and whatnot. So looking forward to getting this thing started again and bringing you guys some more money in your pockets.
And we go to Richmond this week, which is a track we've already been to, which plays right into our hand because there's a lot we have to go off of, both in the next-gen era and even this season here with the Cup Series. So as we get into this, Cole, and start taking it to the bank, I do want to also tease the fact we've got some big news coming. I mean, we've been off for whatever it's been, 2-3 weeks, but that doesn't mean that we haven't been working. We've got some big news, big details coming up in the works here on your most important NASCAR betting stop, the Money Stop. So stay tuned to social media at @the_Money Stop. Leave it at that for now, and we will transition to Richmond. Cole, let's take it to the bank. Pre-qualifying odds per DraftKings. You got 2 co-favorites, Denny Hamlin and Christopher Bell, plus 475 apiece. Kyle Larson, the most recent race winner, plus 525. Martin Truex Jr. plus 550. And then a really sizable dip down to the 5th highest in odds in Ryan Blaney, who is at plus 1,200. So, Cole, we go to Richmond, and this feels like we say it every time we come here because it always bears mentioning, is that this is a track that has been run by the Toyotas recently, and that's why you see a few heavy Toyota favorites, 3 of those top 4 heavy favorite drivers.
Yeah, and it's weird because I was going through the stats here, making this outline. And yes, Toyotas run this track. They've run it for so many years. But in the next-gen era, we had 5 races here, and Toyota has only won 2 of those races. Both were won by none other than Denny Hamlin, that odds-on favorite, tied with Christopher Bell. The other 2 were won by Fords, and the one Chevy that won this race was actually Kyle Larson. And with that said, I think I'm going to kick it off there with Kyle Larson. Mentioned the 2-week break going into this weekend. Well, let's talk about a guy that doesn't really know what a break is in Kyle Larson. He did have a little bit of a vacation in the homeland of Italy, which I think boded well for him because he came back and did what Kyle Larson does best. He got back in the race car, the sprint car specifically, and wound up winning 3 races in those 2 weeks off. One of those starts, he actually came from the very back of the field and won that race. And he also won the pole for Knoxville as of recording today on the 9th, so yesterday. So Kyle Larson, we know that that's a guy that is racing 25-8, and I think that's going to play a huge factor into how he runs Richmond this weekend. And of course, we just mentioned he won the most recent race of the season going into this break at Indianapolis, coming off his series best 4th win of the season. And you look at what this driver did collectively in those first 22 starts, the second most laps led overall. He is the points leader going into these next 4 regular season starts. And I know we noted the inconsistencies, obviously, given the volatility and being able to play around and really just go all out for these wins, not really stage race. But I think Kyle Larson's always going to be, no matter what, someone who you're going to have on our favorites category for every single episode going forward. Again, he is plus 525 for the win. That is the 3rd shortest odds for the race win. And he's $10,500 for DFS, which is the 2nd most expensive. Looking at Richmond, I mentioned it earlier, he is the lone Chevy driver to win in the next-gen era at this track. He's actually a two-time Richmond winner, the last time coming in the spring of 23. This season, he finished third in the spring with over 140 laps led, and in the next gen, those 5 starts, he has an 8.4 average with over 240 laps led, which is the second most in the garage. So for all those factors right there, keep him busy during the this 2-week break, the success in the first 22 starts, and his overall success at Richmond and collectively in the next-gen era, I think Kyle Larson's going to be a very, very great pick for this weekend. I know he's not Toyota, but he's going to be a top contender for sure, as we saw earlier this spring. And then I will go right down here on the odds-winning list to Martin Truex Jr., who is plus 550 once again for the race win. And he's actually the 4th most expensive driver for DFS at $10,100. So he's going to be the cheapest driver in our favorites category. And I think there's a reason for that. I think we saw in the first half this season that Truex started off really hot. He was one of the more consistent drivers to start the year off. But then the inconsistency started mounting up. You look at collectively his stats from those first 22 starts. He has a 40% top 10 rate and a 14.6 average in that span. So definitely not what you want to see from a driver like that in his final year as a full-time driver in the Cup Series. But even with those inconsistencies, he has the 4th most laps led in 2024. And I think there's something to be said for that. And you got to take into account, he has been one of the best drivers in the modern era at Richmond. He is a 3-time winner there, the last coming in 2021. And you can make an argument that he should have won his 4th earlier this year. If you'll remember back to that, he finished 4th with the most laps led, which was over 220. And he got the win very much taken away from him by Denny Hamlin, who jumped the restart as solidified by NASCAR later in the week. So Martin Truex Jr., he has 3 wins here already. Should have had a 4th earlier this year, arguably. And you look at the next-gen era, he has the most laps led in the next-gen car with over 320. He has the 3rd best average finish at 6.6 and a lowest finish of 11th in the next-gen era. So 5 starts in the next-gen car at Richmond, lowest finish of 14th, average finish of 6.6. And he has a 15th place average career with the 2nd most laps led through 36 starts. So looking at a very big sample size there, collectively throughout his career and in the next-gen era, it makes all the sense in the world for MTJ to get back on track here with a potential win in the 23rd race of the season and 3 races left, or 4 to go until the playoffs.
Yeah, I think there's a few no-brainers this week. You just mentioned 2 of them, and I think there's a reason why Vegas has those 4 so highly favored over the rest of the field, and Larson and Truex are no exception to that. But there's 2 other massive no-brainers, including the odds-on favorite, the Richmond race winner from earlier this year, my favorite to win the race, Denny Hamlin, plus 475, co-favorites with Christopher Bell. He is the most expensive DFS driver as well per DraftKings, $10,700, and he is a 3-time winner this year. However, the most recent of those wins, not since the end of April at Dover, which is kind of hard to believe. However, he has surpassed Kyle Larson for the most laps led this season in the Cup Series, and his win at Richmond earlier this year was the 5th of his career. He's got top 5s in 4 out of the 5 next-gen starts he has had at Richmond, 2 wins, 1 runner-up, and the best average finish in the field at 5.6 with 135 laps led. So all signs point to Denny Hamlin being the one to watch this week. He's led laps over his last 8 Richmond starts, and he has the most laps led, and his average finish of 8.3 over 35 starts at Richmond ranks 3rd. So he's been the man at Richmond. He will always be the man at Richmond, I think, as long as he is racing, especially in this next-gen era. And listen, you talk about some of those drivers that need big runs entering the playoffs, such as the guys on the bubble, Bubba Wallace, Ty Gibbs, guys of that caliber. I think you're going to really start to see the favorites for the championship, the Kyle Larsons, the Denny Hamlins, the William Byrons, Christopher Bells, that are going to want to string together some momentum and extra wins entering the playoffs, because we've seen it. Momentum is a very real thing in this sport. And not only that, the bonus points are going to go a very long way when they get into the playoffs this year. So I think you're going to start to see that 11 team kick off at least one more win before the playoffs roll around. And again, I mentioned Christopher Bell in that same air, co-favorite to win this race, 10,300 in daily fantasy. He is certainly a favorite, and he has had one of the best second halves of the summer of any driver. 4th at Indy, 12th top 10 of the season, which is tied for the second most in the sport. And I mentioned that Denny and Kyle Larson have the most laps led this year. Well, Christopher Bell is third on that list. So he has been, albeit for some races where he's run into poor luck, I should say, he has been one of the most consistent drivers all year, and that is exemplified by the number of laps led. And also in the spring, he finished 6th at Richmond. He has top 6 finishes in 4 out of the 5 next-gen starts at this track, including 1 runner-up, 98 laps led, and the 5th best average finish in the sport of 7.6. He has a career average finish of 7.5 at Richmond over 8 total starts. So as you're looking at favorites, Cole, I think there's no other recipe for success than the 4 drivers we named. Larson, Truex, Denny Hamlin, Christopher Bell. I mean, we quite simply agree with Vegas this week. But looking at sleepers, there's a few different directions you could go because, again, there's a pretty sizable gap down from those 4 drivers down to the rest of the pack. But we've got our eyes on a few drivers that, again, very similarly, they would like to string together some successful runs entering the playoffs.
Absolutely. We have 4 names here that should definitely be considered for this race win. The first one I'm going to mention is the hottest driver going into the 2-week break. He's also the least expensive driver in this category of the 4 drivers we're about to mention, and that's going to be Tyler Reddick, who is plus $1,600 for the race win and $8,800 for DFS, which is only the 11th most expensive in the field. And I mentioned it. He was the hottest driver in the garage going into this 2-week break. 5-race top 6 streak, including 2 runner-ups, and that included that second place finish at Indianapolis where he started from the pole. And in those first 22 races, he had 1 win, 3 runner-ups, and 5 podium finishes in those 22 starts with an 11.3 average and the 5th most laps led. That 11.3 average finish was the second best in the field, only to Chase Elliott. So speaking on what we saw from Tyler Reddick in the first half of the season, you can make the case he was one of the best drivers in the garage. The only cause for concern on my end is that his lack of success at Richmond. But there is a silver lining here because he did score his first ever top 10 there in 8 starts this past spring, where he finished 10th at Richmond. He also won the pole with over 80 laps led in this race last year, where he finished 16th in both 2023 races. So I think there is a bit of concern going into this race, I guess, when you look at the Richmond history for Tyler Reddick. But you look at what he's done this year collectively, there is no reason to believe that he shouldn't be a firm contender for this win. And again, driving for 2311 Racing in a Toyota Camry XSE, he's going to be up there running up front, in my opinion. So Tyler Reddick, look for him to stay hot this weekend going into Richmond. And someone who I'm looking at to get back on track is a former winner this season, but he is in need of a massive reset after only scoring 1 top 10 and 4 finishes of 18th or worse over his last 5 starts. That is going to be Brad Keselowski, who is also plus $1,600 for the race win and a steep $9,600 for DFS, which is actually just outside the top 5 as the 6th most expensive in the field. Brad K, we know him as someone who excels on the flat, short tracks, your Richmonds, your Phoenixes, your Loudons, and I think you look at what he's done this season. He started off as one of the more consistent 4 drivers in the field. He already has the win, and he also finished 8th at Richmond earlier this year. So to me, that makes me believe that he should be a contender for at least a top 10 finish in this race. He's actually riding a 3-race top 10 streak in the next-gen era at Richmond. He has a best finish of 6th in the next-gen, including this race last year with over 100 laps led, with a lowest finish of 15th and a 10.4 average in those 5 7th-generation car starts. So I look at Brad K to be strong in this race. He's also a 2-time Richmond winner, the last coming back in 2020. The big thing for me is that he has over 1,200 laps led and a 12th place average in 29 starts, so a really good sample size. But even more impressive than that, he has a 17-race top 15 streak going at Richmond. That is not an easy feat to accomplish, and for that, I think we will see Brad get back on track, get a bare minimum top 10 finish, and have a really strong day here at Richmond in the Cookout 400.
As far as other sleepers go, Cole, I think it's hard to pick this next guy I'm going to mention as a sleeper with just how consistent he's been, but I'm going to call him a sleeper because we're talking about the race win, and we want to see Chase Elliott with more race wins this year. He's plus 1,200 for the win, which is actually tied for the 5th highest odds, 9,200 in daily fantasy, which is the 8th most expensive driver. But he has been the most consistent driver in the garage through 22 starts this year. He has an average finish of 10.5, which is just remarkable for this late in the season. He sits 2nd in the regular season standings, which gives him even more incentive to try and continue stringing together some momentum entering the playoffs, because there's the added incentive, not just of the momentum and the playoff bonus points, but also of the regular season championship. And so I think you're going to start to see this team really turn it on and not just continue to be consistent, but be a race-winning team every single week the next 4 weeks as they look to get some steam heading downhill into the playoffs. Chase Elliott, though, is yet to win at Richmond. Another reason why he's a sleeper. His best finish here was in 2018. He finished runner-up. He's got 7 top 10s out of 16 starts this year, which really doesn't burn your eyes off. He's got 6 of those top 10s were top 5s, including 2 in the next gen, which gives you a little bit more cause for excitement about Chase Elliott this week. He was 5th in the last race with laps led at Richmond, top 15 in all 4 next-gen starts, which, no surprise, is very consistent, a 9.3 average finish at Richmond. So I just think that you look at Chase Elliott, that 9 team, how consistent they've been this year, how good they've been overall at Richmond, and just where their positioning is in the standings right now. I think that you're going to start to see that team turn a corner. And it's a lot like we saw the last, when Jimmy Johnson was running, and we just kind of saw the slog of the summer months, which, not to say that that's what this is for Chase Elliott, but it was right around this time of year, right when the playoffs were about to begin, they turned it up. And I see a lot of the same qualities in this number 9 team with Chase Elliott and the entire team there. So I like Chase Elliott quite a bit this week as a sleeper. And then one of our favorite sleepers this season, Cole, that's made us look pretty smart. How about Joey Logano? Plus 1,200 for the race win. He is also tied for the 5th highest odds. We mentioned him at the top of this Take It to the Bank segment, and he's right behind Chase Elliott in the DraftKings DFS pricing. So he's 9,100, 9th most expensive driver. And entering the break, we saw some really good signs from Joey Logano. He had the win, which we picked him as a sleeper in that race, an additional top 5 over his last 4 starts. So he's been starting to see more consistency. And the bright spot prior to this stretch was a runner-up finish at Richmond, where he could have very easily won that race. At Richmond, he is a 2-time race winner, the most recent of which, though, not since 2017. In addition to the 2 wins, he's got 3 runner-ups, a 9.7 average finish, which is inside the top 10, and 4th best in the sport at this track with over 650 laps led and a 4-race top 10 streak here. 7.2 average finish in the next gen is 4th best in the garage, and he has an 8 top 10s over his last 10 starts at Richmond. Podium finishes in 4 of those 8 top 10s. So for Joey Logano, I love what I've seen as far as consistency, and it's kind of a perfect blend when you look at his track record at Richmond. He's been really consistent at this track, and he's been really consistent over the course of this later portion of the summer. So for 2 guys in Chase Elliott, Joey Logano, they have not been lighting up the stat sheets with wins this year, but in the case of Chase Elliott, consistency all year, reason to believe based on the past experience that he could be a race winner at Richmond. And in the case of Joey Logano, he's got the results at Richmond in his career, and you could start to see the signs of a breakout coming as Ford has heated up over the course of the summer. So I really like the 2 of those drivers just outside the top 4 in odds as potential winners who you could see come from just outside the top 4 there and potentially catch a few people off guard entering the 3-race stretch before the playoffs.
Yes, and I'm a big fan of that sleeper category because you look at the complexion of it. I mean, these are 4 guys who have done exceptional the entire season. I mean, I guess with the exception of Joey Logano, who's kind of just now rounding a corner into form, but they're all single race winners this season. So I think that in itself speaks on its own to why they could be sleepers in this race. And then you look at the favorites category as well. These are the 4 drivers who led the most laps this season. So I think, there's a lot of unknowns going into this race with the 2-week break, but I think this very well illustrates, how the first 22 races went, and as well as what we've seen historically and recently at Richmond. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of these drivers we've mentioned so far as favorites and sleepers, and I think we have some really good values here as well. I'm going to kick things off here. When we're talking value picks, we're typically talking about drivers who are going to put some money in your pocket from a DFS sense. And I think for this weekend at Richmond, that has to begin with one of the best short track drivers in the garage area in Josh Berry, who is going to be an automatic lock him up, load him in driver for this weekend at $7,800. Josh Berry finished runner-up at Richmond last spring and 11th this year with laps led in both starts. Also, of his 4 top 10s this season, half of those have come on the short tracks. He's also led laps in 3 short tracks this season with 59, and he also has 5 top 15s and 7 starts on short tracks this season. So, there was talk about how this team might not adapt to the equipment at Stewart-Haas Racing, which was not up to par last year. It was his rookie year in the Cup Series, but I think all those questions have been put to rest given the rapport he's had with Rodney Childers and their ability to execute on the short tracks this season. I mean, you've seen it, even with those finishes outside the top 10 and top 15, he's been a contender on these tracks every single time we go out there, running in the top 10, leading laps. So, in my opinion, Josh Berry is going to be someone who needs to be in your lineup if you're serious about winning money this weekend. And then finally, going to pick on someone who we've had in this category pretty much as a mainstay of the entire season as one of our safest picks, and that's going to be Noah Gragson at $6,600. His 9th place finish at Indy was his 7th top 10 this season, so that's really, really impressive for someone who has very limited starts in the Cup Series, and again is racing for Stewart-Haas Racing, who really did not have the best equipment the last couple of years, so really impressive by that 10 team. He also has 2 top 10s over his last 4 starts, so there's been consistency from that bunch, as well as results collectively throughout the year. And looking at Richmond, he finished 12th here in the spring, and he's also won here in the Xfinity Series, so talk about safe bets for DFS. Noah Gragson has proven to be just that this season. Pretty much every single weekend we go to a racetrack.
He's been, like you said, one of our mainstays, I feel like, as a value pick this year. And I think if you were going to pick maybe a value pick MVP, one of our favorite guys all year that's made us look pretty smart is Todd Gilliland. So let's go with him again. 6,500 in terms of the daily fantasy, which is definitely a lock-it-in type of feel to that value. He scored his 4th top 10 of the season at Indy when he was also, again, one of our values. He's had top 10s in 2 of his last 3 starts. It has been so impressive to see Todd Gilliland sort of come of age this year. And he finished 21st at Richmond in the spring, which is nothing to write home about. But for someone that's at this value, you'll certainly take that kind of a result in the sense that it could build on something better for this start. His best finish at this track, Richmond, was 15th last year in the spring. He's got a 15.8 average finish in 4 starts on the short, flat tracks such as Loudon, Phoenix, Richmond, with a best finish of 12, reiterating a 15.8 average finish in those 4 starts, which is above the season average finish for Todd Gilliland. So what that tells you is that he has a knack for these short, oval, flat tracks like Richmond. So I think Todd Gilliland is a really good sneaky pick that I could absolutely see finishing in the top 10 for a potential 3rd time in the last 4 weeks. Again, he is one that when we've seen the signs, he has made us look smart, flat out. He has finished top 10, top 15 numerous times on our account this year, and I would not be surprised if it happens again. That's why we mention him. Probably our most expensive driver in this value picks category, Cole. You talk about Josh Berry at 7,800 in DFS. If you can't pay that price, take one driver behind him. Bubba Wallace, 7,600 in daily fantasy. Entering this Olympic break, he was probably the driver who was the most disappointed to see the break come because he was on his hottest and most consistent stretch of the season. He had a 4-race top 15 streak going that included 3 top 10s, a 5th place finish at Indy. He is now 7 points out of the playoff standings with 4 races to go. That is 17th in the standings. So Bubba Wallace, we've talked about it a few times already in this podcast episode, that fact that he needs some good results. He has been able to see some good results. Finished 13th in the spring at Richmond, top 15s in 3 of his 5 next-gen starts at this track, which, again, above his career average. He's had laps led over his last 3 starts, including 80 in the race, this Richmond race from last year. He's also had a best finish of 12th at this track twice. He did it both in the fall of last year and in the fall of 2019. So he has had a mixed bag of results at this track, but mostly consistent and good ones. And again, I'm taking a little bit of stock into the fact that this team was fast entering the break. I think that is not a fluke. I think that, there's certainly some points of momentum to be brought out of that break because, listen, it's still the same team, still the same driver, still the same setups, and we've seen what he's done at Richmond and these types of tracks this year. And you know that they're going to have a lot of resources poured into that 23 car this week and the following 3 to make sure it is a playoff number 23 car. So I call him a big fan of that value picks category with Josh Berry, Noah Gragson, Todd Gilliland, and Bubba Wallace. As we had 4 from each tier, let's talk about one driver from each tier that we will take. Out of the favorites, Cole, I'm going to take Denny Hamlin. Easy choice there. I will take Chase Elliott out of the favorites, out of the sleepers category. And then out of the values, I will take that Bubba Wallace.
Awesome. Yeah, for me, I'm going to go with Kyle Larson for the favorites tier. I will go with Tyler Reddick for my sleeper, and I'll go with Josh Berry for my value pick.
Well, if you're new to the show, some of the best ways to make money are not through race winner picks, but they are through prop bets. And for prop bets in NASCAR, you're going to find really good odds in the sense that you could feel pretty comfortable in finding a driver like plus 200 to finish in the top 5, and you could feel really comfortable putting several units on that compared to a more risky race winner bet. And so, Cole, as we talk about what we like to call big money bets for the Cookout 400, I think there's a lot of value this week to be had for top 5 bets. I think when you get to top 10s, things are a little bit more dicey. You can look in a gamble at somebody like Josh Berry at plus 110 to be in the top 10, or somebody like Bubba Wallace at minus 110 to be in the top 10. But as I look at the prop bets this week, I am very heavily considering quite a few of the top 5 bets, including Chase Elliott at plus 150, Brad Kay at plus 210, Tyler Reddick at plus 210. Those are definitely the ones that catch my attention. What else you got?
Yeah, so for this week, I'm actually a bit on the fence here with the big money bets. I don't think there's a whole lot of value for me personally with the top 5 values. I do think the Tyler Reddick top 5 is enticing, but given his history at this track, there's a little bit cause for concern on my end. The only true big money bet I'm a fan of is Josh Berry to finish top 10 at plus 110. And then from there, I want to throw a little bit of a caution to the wind here for this weekend because, we are coming off a 2-week break. It's going to be a bit of a hard reset for a lot of drivers and pretty much the entire sport at this point. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a feeling out process. And by that, I mean, what usually for these shows, for all intents and purposes, you want to place your bets early before practice and qualifying. But this is a weekend where I would much rather look at how practice and qualifying go before I make any big bets for a race winner. Obviously, if you feel good about like Denny Hamlin or Kyle Larson or whoever in the favorites category, then by all means, do your thing. But for me, when I'm looking at on-track bets, I'm looking at the top 3 props. So for someone like, all the drivers in the field are over even money for the top 3 finisher prop. So if you like Denny Hamlin a lot, he is plus 135 for a top 3 finish. Kyle Larson's plus 145 for a top 3 finish. MTJ plus 150. That's a really good value as well. So I think my only true big money bet value per se is the Josh Berry top 10 at plus 110. But I think that there is a lot of value in those top 3s. Just speaking on the unknowns going into the on-track activities for this weekend. Obviously, once you have practice and qualifying, those odds are going to shift. Whoever looks the fastest, has the most consistent lap times, it'll probably go under even money. So for that, I'm a big fan of like betting on a top 3 finisher prop as opposed to a race winner prop going into the on-track action this weekend.
And I think that's really good advice. I think that minus 130 for the Toyota to be the winning manufacturer also feels pretty good to me. That would be one of my favorite big money bets of the week while it's less than even money. I think that's very sound advice. But Cole, as we look at head-to-head driver matchups, because these are, it's very hit or miss depending on the week and how we feel. I think that based on the fact that we want to see some practice and results over the weekend before locking in certain bets, there's a few here that we'll run through and I'll see what you think of them. So as we look at the head-to-head match bets, you've got Larson versus Byron, Hamlin versus Truex, Logano versus Elliott, Berry versus Buescher, who we haven't talked about yet, and then Blaney versus Bowman. So what do you think of those 5 matchups there?
All right, so one thing I forgot to mention in my disclaimer moments ago is that on top of there being a 2-week break and this being pretty much a hard reset for the entire field, there is another massive element that we did not discuss, and that's going to be the wet weather option tires. So NASCAR announced previously that going forward for the short tracks that can utilize the wet weather tires, it will now be up to the discretion of the teams when to put those on, when to run the slicks. So I think with the potential lingering effects of Tropical Storm Debbie, that we can see this race be very, very unpredictable. And for that, I think this is also kind of a tough race to predict from a betting sense and whatnot. So I like using this race as a feeler race, so throw some smaller bets out here and there, but keep in mind that there's going to be a lot of unknowns with this 2-week break and the potential for wet weather tires being utilized. And for that, I'm not a huge fan of the head-to-head bets this weekend, but with that being said, there are a few matchups here that I do like a lot on paper. I do like Kyle Larson over William Byron. I think there's no reason to believe that should not come to fruition, given Larson's stats at Richmond, given his stats this season, and the fact that he's remained hot in the two off weeks. So I like Kyle Larson over William Byron quite a bit. I think that the Berry versus Buescher one's interesting because obviously we mentioned Josh Berry's esteemed short track resume and success, but Chris Buescher has also won at Richmond as recent as last year, and he also is in need of a win. I won't say he's not in need of a win, but he's in need of a really good points day to keep his playoff hopes alive this season. So that's a bit of a toss-up for me. And then the Blaney and Bowman one's interesting as well because Ryan Blaney, he was one of the hottest drivers in the sport going into that 2-week break. However, he's had a pretty abysmal resume at Richmond in his Cup career. Bowman also has not been the most flashy driver at Richmond, but he is, however, a winner here back in 2021, and he has 2 top 10s here in the next gen. So it's a bit of a toss-up for me as well. I think the only one I like really is Larson over Byron, and I think there's just too much uncertainty and too much risk to really put any confidence in any of those other bets for me personally with the head-to-heads. Obviously, once you see practice and qualifying, you'll get a better idea for which drivers are going to be better than the others. But at that rate, I just think there's too many variables at play that it's not really going to be beneficial to make a bet on the head-to-heads. For me personally this weekend, I'm going to be looking at the top 3, top 5, top 10 prop bets, as well as the DFS lineup for this weekend.
And I love our recommended DFS lineup this week. And this is another one, again, if you might be new to the show, you're getting ready for the NASCAR playoffs, want to make some money, you don't want to lock this lineup in until you see the starting lineups, because there are many different ways to get DFS points. One of them is place differential. So if a driver, the values do not change in daily fantasy from the second they're released on Wednesday night till the second that the race begins on Sunday afternoon. So if the driver that you pick starts the race in first, but they finished in 31st, you're going to lose 30 points there. If it's the vice versa of that, they're going to gain 30 points. So always want to caution people to watch the starting lineup, look at the starting lineup, and take note of that before you officially lock in a lineup. But there's one that we really like this week, Cole, and it concerns 6 drivers that we discussed. This feels like a very well-balanced lineup, and it leads off 2 cheapest drivers, Cole, Todd Gilliland, Noah Gragson at 6,500 and 6,600. Then you've got 2 medium-priced drivers, Bubba Wallace and Josh Berry, 7,600 and 7,800. So as you pick 4 drivers there that are really good values this week, that allows us to pick both Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson, the 2 most expensive drivers, 10,700 and 10,500. So I feel like anytime you can get those 2 guys in your lineup and feel that good about the other 4, that's about as good of a DFS lineup as you can get entering the weekend.
Yeah, I got to be honest. So I was actually stunned we were able to fit both Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson into the same lineup while maintaining a depth throughout from the other 4 remaining drivers. And those other 4 drivers were the 4 drivers in our value picks section. So we mentioned this going on 2 years now. Our value picks have been our bread and butter. We've made people a lot of money off those value picks. So to be able to fit 4 drivers in there in Josh Berry, Noah Gragson, Todd Gilliland, Bubba Wallace, I think that's going to pay off in a huge way for bettors, having those 4 drivers on top of the 2 bona fide aces this season. And how I went about doing this. So for the first lineup, I like to make 2 lineups each week. So the first lineup I make every week, I build from the average remaining salary per driver and up. And that began with Josh Berry. So every weekend, you're pretty much right at that $8,000 range when you start crafting these things. He's $7,800. I mentioned that during my analysis, if you're serious about winning money, you've got to include Josh Berry. He is a short track ace. He's proven it time and time again in no matter what series he's driving in. And to finish runner-up here in the Cup Series in his first start at Richmond, that speaks volumes. He's led laps and bolt starts this track in the Cup Series, so you got to lock him in there. And then obviously was able to fit both Noah Gragson and Todd Gilliland, both who scored top tens at Indianapolis going into the break, and two of the most safest bets from a value pick perspective this season. Seems like a no-brainer. And again, Bubba Wallace, we mentioned him as one of the most consistent drivers going into the break. 4-race top 15 streak, 3 top 10s, 5th at Indianapolis, also on the points bubble. I think Bubba Wallace is due for a huge day. And then, we mentioned it numerous times throughout the year and pretty much since the inception of the show. You don't want to get caught up in putting too many superstars into your lineup, like typically your Denny Hamlins and Kyle Larsons, but you look back to this race earlier this year at Richmond. Denny Hamlin won the thing, Kyle Larson finished top 5, so this is a weekend where I feel like it's more cut and dry than normal if you're not factoring in the unknowns of like the potential wet weather tires and the 2-week break. But I think these are two drivers that no matter what, on a weekly basis, they're going to be two of the top contenders for the win. And for that, this is a excellent lineup. And just to give you some perspective here, again, for how I construct these things. So when I was building from the average remaining salary per driver and up, I was able to fit in Tyler Reddick, Chase Elliott, and Joey Logano. So while that was a pretty consistent lineup, I always want to try and fit one of those bona fide aces in there. So for the next lineup I made, I started with Kyle Larson and built up from there with the average remaining salary per driver. And I was still able to fit those 4 value picks, Berry, Gregson, Gill, and Wallace. And I had enough money left over to where I could fit in the most expensive driver in the field, Denny Hamlin. So it worked out to where this is an extremely consistent lineup. It's a very depth-filled lineup, and I think it's going to win a lot of people a lot of money this weekend, truthfully. I know we say that quite a bit, but you look at how this lineup's made up with 2 of those bona fide aces and 4 excellent value picks. There is no reason to believe they shouldn't win people a lot of money this weekend.
Let's talk about race winner and sleeper picks, Cole. We've got some unfinished business here. Let's put our money where our mouth is and talk about who we think is going to win the race. Sometimes it could be a gut call. Sometimes it might even change by Sunday. But as of right now, Cole, I do want to start this by mentioning the fact that what I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I picked the last race winner, Kyle Larson, as the winner at Indy. Kind of knew he was going to win that crown jewel race, that there was something magic about Indy and him this year in spite of the double being ruined. Well, he won that race. And I get to pick first this week. And I am kind of torn. I really like Christopher Bell a lot this week, but I can't have first pick and not take Denny Hamlin. I'm going to go with Denny Hamlin as my race winner this week. He's the surest bet that there is in the field. There's 4 heavy favorites. In my opinion, it's got to be one of those 4 guys, and it would be foolish of me not to take the low-hanging fruit.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, he's a 5-time winner here, the most recent winner here. And his stats speak for themselves collectively, being pretty much the series best here in all aspects at Richmond. So, yeah, definitely excellent pick. I would have had to probably scorn you if you didn't pick him as well for the race winner pick with the first grab. For me, it is very tough because there are a lot of good options this weekend. I think that the other 3 we mentioned, Christopher Bell, Kyle Larson, MTJ, are all very, very great picks for this weekend for the race win. I will actually go with Christopher Bell this weekend for the race win. I think his stats are very similar to Denny Hamlin from a smaller sample size when you look at it. And for that, I think that he is a great pick. He's a 3-time winner this season. He's had a lot of success at Richmond in the past, so he will for sure be my pick for this weekend. And it's fitting because they're both tied for the shortest odds to win this race. And then for a sleeper, we're looking at 15th and lower in the odds per BetMGM. That's going to be Ross Chastain and lower. I will go 1 below Ross Chastain and go with Bubba Wallace for my sleeper. I think you look at what he did before this 2-week break. 4 straight top 15 finishes, 2 top 10s, 5th place finish at Indianapolis. And plus you factor into account that he has had speed. He's led laps here recently at Richmond. I think that should bode well for him, also being in a 2311 racing car. And also, got to keep into account, he's got baby Bubba on the way here pretty soon. So, he wants to keep this momentum rolling. He's got to have a good points day in order to make the playoffs. He's, again, 7 points below the cutoff with 4 races remaining until the round of 16. So, I look for Bubba to have a really strong day and a top 10 day for sure at Richmond.
Yeah, Bubba's a super strong pick. I would have definitely had him as my sleeper if I had first pick at sleeper. And listen, a Toyota at Richmond, you're certainly not going to lose any love on that pick by any stretch. I'm going to go with a Ford, though. Give me Todd Gilliland. I mean, we've said it so many times this year about Todd Gilliland, one of our DFS darlings. I just think that in spite of him being so far down in the odds, the probability of him finishing in the top 15 feels so much greater to me than what Vegas is giving him credit for. I mean, he's plus 20,000 for the race win. I like Todd Gilliland a lot this week based on some of the elements that we discussed. This will be a night race. It'll be this upcoming Sunday night, the Cookout 400, 6:05 p.m. Eastern Time on USA Network. After the long-awaited layoff, we are finally back, and it is going to be an exciting race. Cole, any parting words?
No, I'm just really pumped up for this race. I think there's a lot of unknowns going in, with the 2-week break obviously playing a factor, as well as the potential threat for rain and these wet weather tires. I think selfishly, as a fan, I would love to see that come into a factor, because we've seen some really compelling races on those wet weather tires, and it's a lot of fun. It's different, but I think as a bettor, or for what this show's purpose is, you don't want to see that. You want to see some sort of uniform racing, what we've seen in the past here at Richmond, but we all want to see some good racing, and for that, I'm just looking for a great race. I'm happy that NASCAR is back. I'm feeling refreshed, rejuvenated from that 2-week break, and I cannot wait to put some more money in your pockets beginning off with Richmond.
That's the goal. That's why we call it the money stop. It is not only the most important NASCAR stop at the end of the race, that you can't win the race without winning the money stop, but you also can't win your bets without listening to the money stop. We want to put some money in your pocket, and that is the namesake here on your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. That will do it this week. After the long time off, we think that we're feeling pretty confident this week at Richmond that we're going to make you some money and make your pockets a little richer. So for Cole, I'm Steven. This has been great. Cookout 400 this Sunday night. Do not miss it on USA Network. NASCAR is back, and so are the Cusumano brothers. That'll be it for now. Thanks so much for tuning in. Follow us on social media at @the_money_stop. And please like, subscribe, leave reviews, whatever you want us to talk about. If you have any questions, whether it be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast, or even on social media, let us know what you think. We would love to hear your thoughts. And we're very excited about the road ahead. We have got 14 races left this year. It's hard to believe that we are that close to the home stretch, but here we go. It all starts at Richmond. So that's it. For Cole, I'm Steven, and we'll see you guys next week.